Hey, listeners. Before I get to today's intro, I have to pause and offer my sincere thanks to all of you. This is the 75th episode of the Writing and Resilience podcast. Yes, I have completed 75 episodes, and I would not have made it this far without your generous support of this podcast and my work. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And now about today's episode. What if the key to writing through pain isn't pushing harder, but rather being radically kinder to yourself? That's what I'll explore with Dr. Risa Ryger, clinical psychologist, international speaker, and founder of 93% Consulting. She's the creator of the Disruptive Self-Ownership Process, host of Disruptive Conversations on Instagram Live, and an expert on helping women stop playing small so they can step fully into their lives and say, I've got this. In today's episode, we explore what it really means to change and write through pain, not from a place of brutal self judgment, but from a place of self trust, curiosity, and compassion. Dr. Risa shares how pain often shapes the stories we tell ourselves, why disruption doesn't have to mean destruction, and how the self owned mindset she developed offers a blueprint for reclaiming all the parts of yourself that may have been pushed aside. If you're navigating trauma in your writing, wrestling with your inner critic, or wondering how to begin without overwhelming yourself, this conversation is here to support you. Get ready to feel seen, affirmed, and gently challenged. Let's dive in. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, a podcast for writers who want to create stories that change lives, especially their own. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison. As a writer and trauma-informed writing coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey through the art of writing, self-discovery, and resilience. Each week, I'll share my best tricks, tips, and strategies to help you write more authentically, craft deeper, truer stories, and overcome the common storytelling roadblocks we all face. Together, we'll explore how to bounce back when life gets tough and stay connected to your inner calling. So grab your pen, your notebook, and an open heart. It's time to do the work that changes the world, one story at a time. Well, hello, Risa. Welcome to the Writing and Resilience podcast. I am so delighted to have you on, and I am so excited about today's conversation.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, and thanks so much. This is a conversation that's been percolating for a while, so we get to go right into it.
Yeah, and I want to say that just even the conversation we had before we hit the record button was an absolute gift. So I'm really excited today about all of the things we're going to dive into regarding disruptive conversations, how we talk to ourselves, and how we can change those things so that we can live our 10.0 lives, something you talk about a lot on your Instagram lives. But before we get into that, I love to give my guests the first shot at telling us a little about themselves. So, what would you like us to know about you and your work?
That's a great question, and I always find this moment of how do we present ourselves? And as writers, as clinicians, it's an important one. And one of the best ways that I have really worked to be able to introduce myself is that I'm an expert in change, and that decades of my work has been dedicated and devoted to helping individuals, teams, companies make important change and make positive change. And as you know, and what I say is that the great news is that positive change can happen at any point. We're not too late.
I love that. And that's one of the things I've loved about listening to your disruptive conversations, which you share on Instagram. And so, listeners, if you have not yet checked those out, definitely do so. I will put a couple of them in the show notes. Yeah, so let's start there. You have these conversations, and I was going through your Instagram earlier today, and I kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. So, how long have you been doing these disruptive conversations?
I'm in my second year of doing that. And one of the things I want to say is that when I started them, I really started from an extraordinary place of not knowing. And it wasn't that, I had been doing Instagram lives, I hadn't been, but that oftentimes when we have this gap from what we've been doing to what
Mhm.
we would like to do, is that we need to traverse a gap so that it's no longer a gap because we've now been experiencing and practicing it.
And I was able to be on your show. And what I love is how you hold us through that process. Carly, shout out to Carly, your VA who helps you with this. You just prepared us so well. And what I also love, in addition to the conversation I had and the other conversations you have with entrepreneurs, with artists, with writers about the changes they've made in their lives, is that you end with this message to us. Who else do you know that might also be interested in being on the show, so that it becomes this gift that keeps on giving?
I think that there are so many people, and Instagram Live is dedicated to women. Men should listen to it also because they need the insight and greater understanding. So that although it's an Instagram Live about women, it's for everyone. And it's important to hear and to understand that. And there's so much to be shared.
What I love is that each person is sharing just a slightly different version on the same theme of change. And so you've been doing this for 2 years. What have you learned from all of these incredible women that you have interviewed?
What I have learned is that from each and every person, there is wisdom to be heard, and that we need to listen. And what I like so much is that I have a really huge breadth of women in all different areas of work in their lives, different times and different aspects in their lives. And so it gives us a moment to really dive deeper and understand more. And as you talk about the disruptive process, I want to be really clear that disruption is not destruction. Being disruptive isn't about being destructive. There are two kinds of disruption. There's the disruption that we initiate, and there's also the disruption that comes to us that we need to be able to, within ourselves, be able to meet in the moment.
Yeah, I love how you're saying that disruption is not destruction. And I think that's so important for my listeners because so many of them are writers. They are working on really tough stories. They're navigating a really tough field of just writing and publishing. And so sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves when we're in the crucible, that's one of the ways that I think about it, and I've had many crucibles in my life. I lost my brother Joe to suicide. I had Lyme disease. I had these different things happen in my life that became these crucibles. Is that the pain we experience when we are in the thick of it can feel like destruction. And so I'm wondering if we can just talk about pain for a moment and how pain shows up in the stories that it causes us to tell ourselves and how that works with the change process.
That is a great question, and that's a huge question.
I know it is.
And change and pain is just so intertwined because with change, there comes a degree of pain and uncertainty, discomfort, and disruption. And certainly the level of pain and the situations and the experiences and the feelings that you've had really resonate, and you have them at different levels of intensity. While you were talking, I was thinking that as a clinician and as a consultant, I listen to a lot of pain, and we bear witness
Mhm.
and we hear and are available to hearing the pain. When you're writing, it's a really interesting and multifaceted, multidimensional process
Yes.
because you're in several places at once. One, you are both the speaker, the explorer, and the discoverer. Most people write on their computers. You come up with a blank screen, and it is totally your decision, your power, and your agency as what you are choosing to put on there. It's completely up to you. And there's a coming to oneself time because it's you and a blank sheet. And so where you start isn't necessarily where you end up. But starting somewhere really does count, and you can't start in the wrong spot. So the pain is about the things that we haven't thought about or that we've pushed away. And I talk about that in terms of building the self-owned mindset, which we'll talk about some more, of needing to disrupt what we've lost about ourselves, what we've pushed aside about ourselves. And not because we're weak. There's all sorts of messaging and experiences that we learn from to cut off, abandon, disown, and separate ourselves from aspects of who we are. And pain is one of those places.
Yeah.
And to make change, there's a degree of discomfort. Change isn't necessarily whoop-de-doo, because we have a lot inside of ourselves that resists change. So here you are with your moment of, I want to write about my experience, and my experience is painful. So that you're in several places simultaneously. One, you're the person who has experienced the pain, and it's you in the process of going into yourself. It's you as the person who's putting those words on paper. And simultaneously, if you can stay with me on that, you're also the person who's bearing witness to that emerging narrative of what you experienced and how. The other aspect about writing memoir, and writing memoir that has a trauma component to it, is that you're in it and looking at it and trying to make sense of it all at the same time. And so acknowledging and giving yourself that, not just approval, but awareness and encouragement of, yes, this is hard. And there's one caveat that I would like to put into this, which is that for women, sometimes there's this idea of not just of honesty. Honesty is great and truth is great, but brutally honest. And so we can have honesty without the brutality.
Yes.
And there's this notion that if we go in and we go to the hardest, most painful place first, and in the hardest and most brutal way, that really means that we're strong. And that is really a piece of mythology. It's also a language that sets us up for how we're supposed to do it, and if we're doing it right, and if we're enough to be able to do it, then we're going to go into the hardest, most painful spot and go there. And there is nothing that says that that's how you do it. And as a matter of fact, oftentimes, and we know this from all sorts of studies of what happens when people are not criticized, not given constructive criticism and not just criticized, but really labeled and blamed and shamed, that impedes growth.
Yes.
Because the first thing you need to get past is the brutal self-commentary and this idea that this is where you have to go. And being able to do that means that there is a building up of your own foundation to be able to go there so that you really and truly can. So don't get stuck. Don't fall into the mythology and misogyny of, you need to go to the hardest place, to the most painful place from the very beginning, full on. And that's what's going to get you there.
Okay, first, I just want to say I am just Feeling so much joy right now because you are speaking my language. You are saying so many of the things that I have told clients, that I have told my students, that I talk about on this show is that, yeah, we don't have to begin in the most difficult place. And in fact, sometimes just dipping your toe in to the waters of whatever challenges you're going to write about is important while you are resourcing yourself, right? Building those resources. And one of the resources you talked about is thinking about the different parts that we play in the process, right? Because what I often tell people with memoir is the very first question that we are asking in that first draft is what happened to me, right? And when we are asking that question, we are, as you shared, the wounded part that went through it. And then we are also these other parts. We are the discoverer, we are the explorer. And can you cultivate an explorer and a discoverer who is really gentle, who is a good guide for the process, that talks to you in a kind and generous way as you're making sense of whatever your story is? And what I find in terms of the storytelling process is that that first draft is just an opportunity to see what you've already been telling yourself. And a lot of the agency comes through the revision process, because it's as we revise our stories on the page, we revise them in our minds, we revise them in our bodies, and that changes how we see ourselves. And so, yes, we can let go of the brutality and really just operate from a place of curiosity in this process.
It's not all or nothing.
Right.
It isn't all or nothing. Don't get stuck in that binary way of thinking, because those are the places that gets us in what I call, the two spots. One is avoidance and the other is overwhelm.
Yes.
When you start, you start. And a start isn't defined as a toe, all your toes, up to your ankles, up to your waist, that we don't have to define it that way, because sometimes even in that language, and I understand where this is coming from because this is the vernacular and it's exactly the spot that we're talking about, is how you're framing it and making sense of it in your head. So if we're talking about, putting a toe in, that sounds like, well, I'm putting a toe in. That doesn't sound like very much. What the toe means, and so I think that we need to develop a different kind of visualization for that, is it's about starting. Today I have the mug and I chose this specifically called comfort, because while we're doing it, we also need to give ourselves comfort. And comfort doesn't mean that we're not holding ourselves accountable when we're shying away. It's about what we need to have in ourselves to know how we're going to treat ourselves as we go
Yes.
through that. And that you become that person that is supporting the process as you're also going through the process. So, starting, however you start, you want to start with a toe, you want to start with an elbow, you want to start with an ear. You don't have to have that visualization. What you can have and what may be more productive for you. And let me know what you all think. But people watching this, like, give me your feedback on this. Is what is a visualization or the words to say to yourself that is truthful, acknowledging, not devaluing, that you don't have to submerge to start. Starting is starting. And that is the most important piece. That is your most important action, is starting. And sometimes what happens is that we start and then we need some moments, but that doesn't mean that it's forever. It means it's for now. And then we can go back, and we're not starting over. We're
Right.
continuing. All is not lost. What you've done, you've done. There's no negating that. What you've done doesn't get erased. You've done what you've done, and that's real and true.
Absolutely. And so what I'm hearing is, sometimes when you say dip your toe in, it sounds like you're not really committed or you haven't really started. And so I love that you are offering a new way to think about that, because that's certainly not what I mean when I'm talking about dipping the toe in. Mostly what I'm talking about is start wherever you're going to start and pay attention to what the temperature of the water is, if we use that metaphor, so that you're not forcing yourself. This is the big thing that I watch people do again and again and again. Sometimes because they want to hurry up and get their stories out for a wide variety of reasons, is that they think that I have to start at a place where I'm forcing myself to go into that brutality to the most difficult level. And so, yeah, start wherever you are. Notice what it's like. If you have to pull back, pull back. But as you said, which I think is so important, never negate the fact that you started, right? You started and you are making progress. And that is so important. And it's something to be celebrated, right? The fact that you started and you are making progress and continuing. And I wonder if this is a great time to also talk about that self owned mindset. Like, how does that fit with the things we're talking about today?
The cell phone mindset, this is something I've given tremendous thought to over my decades of experience in working. And so many of us are familiar with the growth mindset or fixed mindset. And we have language, just like toe in the water. We have language that holds us and frames how we're thinking and gives us ways of thinking. And how we own all of who we are. That doesn't mean that we have to be thrilled about all of it. But, just like anything else, we have to see what's there. And that's one of the hardest things to do, and to own it. If
Yes.
you don't own it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that it's working out of your awareness. And the cell phone mindset is a way of really reclaiming all of who you are from the different factors that are involved in what I call self abandonment. Trauma is like water. You can be triggered at different times. There are times that you're just in the middle of doing something. And we're not talking about PTSD. Trauma also has a wide range. There's a broad spectrum of trauma, and not all trauma is equal. That doesn't mean that it's not painful, meaningful, and that hasn't affected you.
Yeah.
But there's all different kinds of trauma. One isn't more important, it's not less important. There's an understanding about that. And that PTSD, we need to be very clear about the level of trauma that's involved if you're having those levels of symptoms and difficulties. Okay, so going back, in owning all of who you are, and being able to bring that back so that these aren't areas that are happening out of your awareness and affecting you. And so then you wonder, I seem to be dating the same person over and over again.
Yes.
Could there be something I'm missing here? Is there something that I need to understand better? What am I listening to and what am I not listening to? And in our developing and creating and building our cell phone mindset, that is the place where foundational freedom occurs. And that is the place where you have profound choice and you've developed an internal courageousness through the 6 steps to be able to, in time, not all at once. That's why there's six, to be able to look and see, take care of your heart, know that you're not going to be brutal to yourself, know that you're not going to treat yourself cruelly. Because when you go into difficult spaces within yourself, to then feel that you are going to take on that harsh critic and you are going to take on a next level of not taking care of yourself when there were times that others should have been taking care of you differently. Things happen even under the best of circumstances, right? But that you can rely on yourself to be kind to yourself and accepting of yourself, which isn't to mean that whatever I did was perfect and it's exactly fine. it's not a stop point, it's a start point. It's the point where we can develop a level of self-trust that we're able to go into these harder places and reclaim ourselves so that we're not putting effort and energy into keeping things out of our awareness. That's part of what a self-owned mindset is and how, and the steps to how we get there. Because at the times when we're going to these places of pain, perhaps shame, and fear, what can help us and be the security of hands supporting us as we go through is that we are going to be those voices of support that perhaps we wished we had had. But we can be them now because now we have what I call the perspective of now. And with your perspective of now, you can be that person and also that observer for yourself and be that voice, that person, and the supporter to help you be able to navigate these tough spaces, these tough feelings, these tough experiences. And that, as you build more strength and you see yourself moving, we talked about this a little bit of moving, not necessarily through it, but moving in it because we've been metabolizing, making sense of, acknowledging our feelings, acknowledging that those were our feelings then, but that doesn't have to be how we're feeling now, and that doesn't have to be how we're thinking about it now. So, in bringing a perspective of now, along with a knowledge that we are going to be truthful with ourselves, we're going to be accountable to ourselves, but that doesn't have to be horrifically critical, cutting, and brutal.
I love that. And so many thoughts were going through my mind about how I can connect what you're sharing right now to things that I know or things I've experienced. And at the end, I'm going to be asking you this question about how people can learn more about this because I know they're going to want to know about it and how they can engage in this process because it is so powerful. And, when I think about these things, Marsha Linehan and dialectical behavior therapy is one thing that
Yeah.
comes to mind. That message of, I accept myself fully and I can change. I think it's sometimes she says that in a different way, but this idea that I can accept all of who I am and I might need to change, right? Both things can be true simultaneously. And we can hold space for that. And Ingrid Clayton, who I know is supposed to be on your show, I hope that you're able to reschedule
We
that
will.
because I love
Yes.
her. One of the things she talks about in terms of complex PTSD is that the things that we did may not serve us today, but they sure were helpful back then. So being able to reframe that is so important. And you're nodding your head, so I'm going to be quiet so you can share something.
Well, in part of the process of, reclaiming yourself and really bringing back those abandoned, disowned, and cut off parts of ourselves, that we rescue ourselves.
Yeah.
We rescue, and one of the pieces that's so important in relationships is repair. We rescue and repair because, the goal isn't for us to be isolated and solitary. The goal for us as human beings, I'm not imposing anything, but as human beings, there's so much talk about, oh, they're so needy and they're so dependent. And so there's this notion that, well, am I supposed to not have needs? Am I supposed to not have dependence? And one of the important aspects of being human and being in our own humanness is developing our own interdependence.
Yes.
And to be interdependent, you need a self. And there's so much that we're messaged about being less of ourselves, or if we're exerting ourselves, that we're being selfish, that this idea is that we should be selfless. And in the work that I do and my book that will be coming out, I don't have a pub date yet, that the new language and this new way of this whole lens of how we can experience ourselves is through the self owned mindset, which is important for all women, but is also unique to every single woman. It's like fingerprints. Like we all have fingerprints, and there are fingerprints, like your fingerprint is unique in the world. There's no one else. You share fingerprints, with humankind, but your fingerprint is unique. And so it's experiencing your uniqueness and being able to really see and have ownership of that as we move to the space of also being interdependent and what that feels like, and that feeling of belonging and caring and having reasonable expectations of how we're going to be treated and how we treat ourselves.
I love that. And I cannot wait till your book comes out. I'm very excited about this because I think we can have an even deeper conversation about this once your book is here. So I definitely would love to have you back on the show if you'd be willing when you get to that point. If people want to learn more about you now and they want to learn about the self owned mindset or they want to connect with you, what are the best ways for them to do that?
They can DM, they can find me on Instagram, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on my email address, connect. This is all about connection. And we have connected through the grace of someone else. And connection is everything. And starting with being connected with yourself. Being connected with yourself doesn't mean that that's where it stays. It's your spot of having yourself to be interdependent with others and being able to be on this podcast with you, which has been so wonderful and such a joy and has given so much to me in our conversation. So thank you very, very much. And I hope that this gives our communities, more to think about, take in, and to, no matter what, to hold on to you. And that positive change can happen at any point in time. You're never too late.
Yes, you are never too late. And it's always incredible the things that happen when we allow ourselves to change and we allow ourselves to connect more deeply to ourselves. And what I can say about my own healing process is that the more I have connected to myself, the easier and the richer my connections to other people have become. And oh my gosh, my heart is so full. I love this conversation so much, Risa. It has been so wonderful to have you on, and you've just given me so many things to think about. I can't wait to edit this podcast so that I can go through them again because you've had so many gems that you've shared with everyone. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you again on the podcast in all of the other ways that we can connect out in the world.
I look forward to it all. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much for listening. If you want to learn more about Dr. Ryger, her work, and her disruptive conversations on Instagram Live, be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube with the answer to the following question: what's one way that you're kind to yourself? I would love to hear your answer and your thoughts on this episode. And speaking of your thoughts on the podcast, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Mark Kennedy, Devotional Way, Jane Hammonds, Overdressed for Life, Hannah Sward, Rebecca Morrison, Michael Nortness, and Megan Justice for your enthusiastic support of my recent episode with Sean Murphy, and for your fantastic suggestions that you shared with me about how to preserve more of my great shower ideas. Also, special shout out for the person who sent me something in the mail. You know who you are, and I love it. Listeners, if you haven't contacted the show, I would love to hear from you too. Until next time, remember that your story matters, and as you work on it, you change lives, especially your own. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe or follow Writing Your Resilience on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review to help others discover the podcast. 3, join my engaged writing community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, a toolkit for gaslight-proofing your writing practice. Have feedback for the show, a topic you'd love me to cover, or questions you'd like me to answer? Drop a comment on YouTube, text the show, or email me at writingyourresiliencepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep writing, keep growing, and keep showing up for yourself. Your story matters, and I am so proud to be writing alongside you.